Welcome to the end of day review for Thursday, the 22nd of February 2024. As usual, we'll start off with the economic calendar. However, there's a whole bunch of ideas to interpret over that played out over the course of the day. In terms of a high-level overview, we were right for most of the outlooks, both London and New York, and we interpreted the changes in price action and scenarios adequately. Unfortunately, we just couldn't get into a valid trade position, which certainly wasn't ideal. However, this tends to happen and is just part and parcel of trading. So, having said all of that, let's start off with the economic news. How I'm going to do it today is I'm going to focus on each session, and then we can go from there. So, starting off with the London session, we know at 11:30 we have GBP news. And the GBP news was overall negative. Given that service PMI was fairly flat or neutral, we didn't really need to pay attention to it, and thus we could conclude that the GBP narrative, from a fundamental perspective, would be supportive of shorts. Having said that, let's move on to the charts and just unpack the day, starting from the Frankfurt session and then moving forward. So, from a daily perspective, there wasn't any daily bias given that there aren't any significant consecutive daily or bearish or bullish candles. And then from a 4H perspective, we know that from a market structure perspective, we are confirmed bearish, but there was a lot of intricacy to unpack. And the key points here being, perhaps just to start from with a bit of a background, we have this pullback phase leg, which was validated a while back as a result of breaking this 4H OB and validating itself. However, we reached the pro-trend extreme, and once we reached the pro-trend extreme, we identified the pullback phase last point of supply, which was that, and once that was invalidated, we knew that the pullback phase had achieved its objective, and that essentially validated this pro-trend primary leg. However, at the same time, assuming that the pro-trend primary leg was going to be validated, we then had the unconfirmed lower high, essentially anticipating that this is likely to be the swing lower high before, which would be validated once the swing lower low was established right here. However, what you can then see is that actually, instead of this swing lower high actually being validated, we then had an order flow shift by supply failing right here, and then we had demand holding right there with the break of structure validating that the unconfirmed lower high primary leg was at play, and that put us in an unconfirmed scenario, which then brings us to the Frankfurt session this morning, which started in and around this area right here. What we did know for the Frankfurt session is that we had reasons both to long and short. We had reasons to short because of the pro-trend primary leg reaction that we had yesterday, and then we also had reasons to long as a result of this minor window of imbalance where price was weakening but failing to break, suggesting that there was a barrier in place, and thus, because we're in an unconfirmed scenario, we don't trade in against any 4H OBs. And for that reason, starting off with the Frankfurt session, we had reasons to trade both directions, although longs were the probable outcome, given that to trade short we would need to validate this IRL first, because essentially yesterday, or to short would mean trading against this window of imbalance. And for that reason, although we could trade both directions, the more obvious or the prevalent idea starting at the morning was to actually long. So what I'm going to do is move on to the 5 minute and unpack the PA. Although not much to unpack, we were essentially waiting for the Frankfurt session to validate this low of the day, which it did, but a lot of momentum kicked in, and what that resulted in all the IRL to the left being taken out, and then the substructure target also being taken out. And if you recall from back in January when we were in an unconfirmed scenario, in order to trade any idea long or short in an unconfirmed scenario, we needed a substructure high to target that was validated, 4H backing, and internal range liquidity to target. Therefore, for longs, we achieved all those objectives with IRL being available, substructure high and 4H backing in the form of this for of this window of imbalance situated right there. So having said that, what essentially happened is Frankfurt took out the substructure high, and from that point onwards there was only reasons to short because um, the substructure high was taken out. However, what then happened is London actually took out the unconfirmed swing lower high, which then invalidated that 4-8 scenario, based on the assumption that this unconfirmed lower high is targeted, because now that it is targeted, we're back in this pro-trend scenario, and since we're reacting to the pro-trend extreme at a deeper level, it only makes sense that shorts make sense. The unconfirmed scenario has played itself out, and any unconfirmed scenario rules thus fall away. Essentially meaning that we only have reasons to short. Also, because we didn't body break this level and extend the the pullback phase leg, which was started right here, something like that, because there's no body break here from a 4H level, there's no reason to believe that a 4H loss point of supply will hold in this area and result in longs. So for that reason, we only have reasons to short based on a pro-trend scenario, which means that our unconfirmed scenario requirements fall away, and we can go ahead and target this ERL. Obviously, today being a Thursday, it doesn't really make sense to hold a Thursday based trade, even though it is in the high of the week, to target this. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. We were essentially at London, just not too long after the London session, and then we had the London news, which was negative, and that supported our sole bias to short from this point onwards, and that perfectly lined up, at which point I said this order, because we had London high of the day validation by this negative GBP news. We also had the change of characters supporting why this supply should hold, and obviously we want further alignment with the 38% level, given that we're in the London session. So as you can see, I use this range because many candles are encompassed within this one large bearish candle, and then whilst there was this window of imbalance situated just below this POI, unfortunately it doesn't really align with any good position fib levels, suggesting a discount area, and we didn't get tagged into the entry price, came close but didn't tag us, which is one of those things. I left this entry open in the hopes that the volatility from one of these USD news events, while being positive, will just spike into this, triggering us and then running. But unfortunately, as you can see, we then came into the New York session and prices continued to move to the downside as expected. Only thing we hoped for was to get into an entry, which didn't materialize. Coming into the New York session, if you recall from the New York Outlook, essentially I was waiting for US session news to print positive results, and if it did indeed print positive results, that would have meant that we can continue shorting, and that's precisely what it did. 330 was positive, 445 was mixed. So because 445 wasn't purely negative, it wouldn't mean you should cancel any trades. 330 would set the tone for shorting, and then 445 would simply mean that you should just continue holding. And now at 6 p.m. we'll approach our optimal exit time, although you probably would have exited in and around this area, which is your average daily range. Looking at this in hindsight, had we been triggered, a 1, 2, 3.5 was probably likely, but again, it wasn't meant to be, so it wasn't, and that's pretty much the end of day outlook. It's these sorts of days are always interesting because you sort of get both directions, right? Like for the London session, we got the direction right that we wanted to long, and then for the New York session or late London into New York, we knew we wanted to short, and that also played out. Unfortunately, there just wasn't any opportunities to position ourselves well enough to get into an entry. Yeah, and that's perfectly fine. Other than that, I hope you had a good trading session, and we'll chat again tomorrow for the Friday London outlook.